Hello, 24-hour update on the continuous glucose monitor. I've got a long shirt on today, so you can't see it, but it's still on there. You can probably see it through the contour of my shirt. It's been giving me data now for just over 24 hours, so now's a good time to give you initial reactions to what it's doing, how it seems to be working. So I got my first readings at 10 o'clock yesterday. Yesterday was Sunday, so I think I posted a video an hour before where I'd activated the device. Then you have to wait an hour before it gives data. Well, I waited the hour, started recording data. So my first reading was just after 10 o'clock yesterday morning. And I was shocked because the first reading the device gave me was of a blood glucose level of 7.5 millimoles per litre, which is the standard measure we have here in the UK. But that is way higher than I would have expected it to be. When I took that reading yesterday, 10 o'clock yesterday morning, all I'd had since the night before in terms of eating events was that I had a coffee with some cream. That's all I'd had. So I'd not consumed much carbohydrate at all. And I would have expected my readings to be in the range of 4 to 5 millimoles per litre, and it was 7.5. What I then did, I took successive readings. I waited 5 minutes, took another reading. You take a reading by holding the phone near to the device. I'll show you one of those in a moment. Took a succession of readings for the next quarter of an hour, and they were gradually coming down, 7.5 to 7.4 to 7.3. And I thought, well, maybe there's a bedding in process here. Slightly disappointing because, of course, you want it to give a robust reading right from the start. And also, it was a very high reading. Now, luckily, I've got a conventional, if that's the word to use, a blood prick test monitor. So once I'd done the third reading, by that stage, I think it was 7.3 or 7.2 coming off the continuous monitor. I then, at the same point in time, did a blood test, a prick test with my thumb in the standard meter where you put the drop of blood on a strip, you put the strip in the meter reader, and it gives you the reading. And it was 5.0. That was much more or much closer to where I thought it would be. So this was saying 7.2 or 7.3. The standard prick test was saying 5.0. So what I thought I'd do, okay, well, during the day yesterday, I calibrated, as I'm going to call that process, several times. So several times during the day, I took a scan reading and I did a prick test at the same time to see how the two numbers compared. So I've got some data that allows me to sort of translate the reading there compared to a blood prick test. Now, I'm a bit disappointed that you've got to translate. Surely that should now give me the reading, the true reading. And so I am a bit disappointed that it doesn't. There are some reasons. I've done some Googling, and it does seem to be not a common thing, but some people do find accuracy a little bit of an issue with these devices. There is a technical difference. When you do the prick test, you are absolutely measuring the glucose in your blood because you put a drop of blood on the meter, on the strip in the meter, and that gives you therefore the measure of glucose in your blood. This measures the glucose in your interstitial fluid. There's a filament that's gone in from the reader into my skin tissue, and it measures the glucose in the fluid around that skin tissue. So it's not in the blood, it's in the tissue. Now, it should still give the same reading, other than in circumstances where your blood glucose is rapidly changing, because the glucose in your fluid here might lag a little bit, the glucose in your blood, if it's rapidly changing. So when you've got a steady blood glucose level, you'd expect the interstitial fluid to be steady and the readings to be very similar. So I'm a little bit disappointed that it's not given me, but I've got the data to calibrate. So I know if a reading comes off this, I know what to multiply it by to give me a reading that would match a more conventional blood sugar meter. So having done that, I've now got 24 hours worth of data bearing that in mind. Now, how the device works, when I hold the phone against it, I get instantaneous reading. But the device also stores readings from every 15 minutes, 15-minute intervals. So although it's sampling my interstitial glucose level all the time, every 15 minutes it stores a reading. And when I present my phone to the device, it catches up, the phone catches up. So if I scanned now and then scanned an hour later, there'd be 4 15-minute readings in that hour. So when I present the phone to the device in an hour's time, those 4 readings would go into the phone and add to the time series of data that I've got. So in the phone, I've got basically an accumulating series of data, each taken at 15 minutes. And every time I scan the device, not only does it give me an instantaneous reading, but it updates that time series as well. So this keeps a log of all my data since the device started operating, which in this case is yesterday morning. And the application on the phone, the application produced by the manufacturer of the device, plots that on a graph. And I can show you one of those graphs. So let me do that with this one here. So this is the graph from yesterday, and it shows, so here we are, 10 o'clock-ish, where my first data point was. I then had breakfast. Now I've got another graph where I've plotted on here exactly what I ate and when I ate. But let's look at the end of the day, which is the bit I've annotated on here, and explain why I've done the end of the day on this graph. I had a workout starting just after 6 yesterday evening, and you see my blood sugar dropped. But then straight after the workout, I had a meal. That meal was a relatively light meal: smoked salmon, nuts, cheese, olives, and some coleslaw. That brought my blood sugar up a little bit, but not hugely so. And then for the remainder of the evening, it trailed, and this was the point when I went to bed, which was about 10:30 yesterday evening. So you've got these graphs. Because I can't calibrate on the app, I can't tell the app, I think your meter is reading a little bit high. I can't tell the app to scale. So the vertical axis on this graph are the raw readings, the readings that are coming from the sensor. But because of my work with the prick test blood meter, I know these are reading high. But the shape of the graph is right, in the sense that it's just scaled. So what's happening is, because I think the device is over reading, it's moved the graph up the vertical axis, whereas the true reading should be somewhere down the vertical axis. Now that's slightly frustrating, because of course you want it to read what you perceive to be the true data. But maybe it's not a big problem, because what I'm looking at is the shape of the curves. I want to see how my blood sugar responds to food that I eat or activities that I engage in, to see what happens to my blood sugar level. And the shape of the graph, therefore, is the most important thing, and that should still be preserved, even if the vertical axis isn't quite where I'd expect it to be. So that's one of the graphs from the app on the phone. The app that I'm using is the one that is from the manufacturer of the continuous glucose monitor, which is Abbott. They're the manufacturer. The downside of the app, and I know why they've done this, is that you can't export the raw data. So remember I said the device stores data every 15 minutes. Me being the geek, I want those 15-minute data points to put into a spreadsheet, and then I can scale them in the spreadsheet and then plot the graph with the right vertical axis. Well, the app on the phone doesn't allow you to do that. And the reason I think they've made it so you can't download from the app is because the manufacturer of the glucose monitor also produce a hand reader, which is £100 or just over £100, and you can export the data from that. So I think what they're doing is they don't want you to be able to export from the app on the phone, because they want you to buy the reader that goes with it, and from that you can export the data. So I was determined to try and find a way, well, can I hack the data out of the phone? You can. I might explain that in another video, but really using a crowbar in terms of phone technology and hacking into backups and using third-party software, I have managed to export the data. So what I'm going to show you now is a graph in not Excel, I use the Mac version, but in Numbers, which is the Apple version of Excel, which is my data from the start of recording. So this is the same curve, or part of the same curve you saw on the first screenshot, but this is me casting it into a spreadsheet. And I've also put it, the vertical axis, I've used the other measurement scale, which is milligrams per deciliter. Now, the reason I've chosen that is more to do with other, I've seen other people's diaries of what's going on with these continuous glucose monitors, and they're mostly from America, from the States, and that is the unit, they are the units they use in the States. So I've done that on this spreadsheet so that I've got some direct comparison with other people's experiences that I've seen. Essentially, you multiply by 18. So if I had a score of 5.0, which is what I had on the blood test meter that I did yesterday morning, you multiply that by 18, giving 90, and that puts 90 on this scale here. So it's the same data, just multiplied by 18 to give a different scale, but it's still the same data. But the beauty of it being in the spreadsheet is that I can then remember those calibration data points I've got, because I've done a blood prick test and I've compared that to what the glucose monitor is showing me. I can scale my graph according to my calibration. So I think this is more realistic to what I would have got had I been using a blood prick test every 15 minutes and my graph that goes there. So that's why I wanted it in the spreadsheet. And this is the part of the day that's the first 8 hours of me using the device. And there were 2 meal events in that, and I've shown you a little picture of the meal events. So this is me getting my first readings, where my cursor is here now. Then I had breakfast. It was a brunch type breakfast, so quite a big breakfast, and it was scrambled egg, sausage, bacon, and black pudding. A little bit of carbs. There's some carbs in the black pudding. There's obviously some minimal carbs in egg and sausage. These are butchery-made sausages, so they're pretty much all meat. But there is a small amount of carbs and another coffee with some cream in it. And you'll notice, as you'd expect, my blood glucose went up. Not hugely so. So it probably went up. So if that's just over 90, that's probably just over 100. So it probably went up 1.2, 1.3 on the other scale. So that the millimole per liter scale, it went up by that, and on this scale it's going up by about 20, 25 on the scale there. And that's what you'd expect. Then it came down fairly quickly. So that event had sort of, within an hour and a half of eating, my blood sugar was down. There was then a little rise again. I'm not quite sure, and I'm going to sort of see whether this is a regular pattern with my metabolism, that having had a meal, do I get a secondary hump? Whether this was more the insulin and therefore glucose response, or the glucose response rather, I get from protein. Your body, in a healthy body, you'll convert some of the excess protein into glucose. Whether this was my somewhat later processing of the protein from my breakfast, making a little bit of sugar, don't know. Then quite a dip. I did have a power nap then. So whether that's my power nap cause and effect, was it the power nap that caused the dip, or was it a dip that made me want to have a power nap for 20 minutes? Not quite sure. But then I was steady for much of the afternoon, as you can see. And I had a little meal of a few blueberries, a few blackberries, some pecans, and some lovely Jersey cream. And that minimally change things. So actually there's a bit of sugar in the fruit. They're all low glycemic index fruits, the blueberries and the blackberries. And you see, it didn't really do much to my blood sugar level at all. It stayed fairly constant for the next few hours after that. So that was quite interesting. I would have expected, in a sense, I would almost have expected more of a spike from that, because that had the blueberries and blackberries, than the breakfast, because the breakfast, other than in the black pudding, there's not a lot of carbs going on there, but that did cause more of a response. Maybe, as I say, it was more to do with the protein, maybe in the breakfast, that was being converted into sugar, whereas this meal had quite a bit of intrinsic sugar, but it had very little impact on my blood sugar level. So that was quite interesting. I've got one more graph I can show you, I think. I'm going to have to probably, let me pause the screen share. Let me change that, what I'm sharing now, and let's resume the share. So we should have somewhere here, there we go. So now we've got the graph overnight. Again, from the spreadsheet, exporting the data, using my crowbar to get the data out of the device. What happened to my blood sugar overnight? So I've got the 2 key points when I went to bed, and I woke quite early. And this is interesting, the blood glucose monitor only stores, the actual device on my arm, only stores data for 8 hours. So if you leave it more than 8 hours between consecutive scans with the phone, you lose some of your data. So I was quite keen. If I went to bed at 10:30, by 6:30 in the morning, I needed to have done another scan. Took a scan just before bed. I needed a scan early just to make sure I didn't lose any of this data. And I woke up thinking about it at about 5:30, 5:45. And that's a limitation of the device, of course, because if you want to have more than 8 hours sleep, you're going to lose some of your data. But nonetheless, I did capture all the data. I did do a scan at about 6:15 this morning. It's probably my cortisol rise. So this end of the curve here, my natural waking up time anyway. I was a bit early of that, but that's my natural waking up time, bringing about a little rise of the sugar. But you see, while I was asleep, my blood sugar stayed fairly constant. There was a dip at about 1:45 in the morning, quite a low dip actually. That was sort of probably around 50 on the scale. Divide that by 18. That's less than 3 on the. That's probably 2.5, between 2.5 and 3 on the millimole per litre scale. So that's quite a dip there, but actually still quite a narrow range. So that's I would say, a very well controlled blood sugar sequence during my sleep, but then just rising in readiness for the day. As I say, probably to do with cortisol more than anything at the start of the day. So let me just stop there. So there's my first few graphs from the device. What I'm really looking for now is to start collecting data when I eat certain foods or engage in certain activities. What happens to my blood sugar curve? If I have foods that contain more sugar than I'm used to, will I get bigger curves? Will those curves take longer to clear? So I've sort of, although I've got over the issue of calibration, it's not giving me the true reading according to a prick test, but I've got the data to convert one into the other. I've got a rough and ready technique of getting the data out of the device onto my computer so I can put it on a spreadsheet. So I've got all the tools now to start monitoring these curves that I'm going to get from the device over the next 14 days. The device works for 14 days, so I'm potentially going to have 14 days worth of data. Let's do a scan. It should work through my shirt. I tried one earlier. Normally, I'd sort of probably try and have a short sleeve shirt on when you do the scan. So I've just loaded the app. No, I haven't. There we go. Let me go back. So the app is called the Freestyle Libra Link. I've loaded the app. You press a button on the app. It's ready to scan. Hold it there. Oh, perhaps it's not going to do it through the shirt. Oh, there we go. It's just found it. There we go. And so the reading it's giving me is 6.6. Because of the calibration, that's about 5, maybe just under 5 actually on the scale, because of the calibration factors that I'm using. I haven't had lunch yet today. I had a little chunk of cheese with a mid-morning coffee with some cream in it. That's all I've had this morning. So I will see what happens to the curve as we go through the day after that, but it's captured that point reading. What you see the graph today is looking for, I haven't had breakfast yet today. That graph is what's happening so far today. So I've been fairly steady. I say the reading, it's a little bit high on the scale, but I've got the calibration data to bring the curve down, but it's fairly constant. A little bit low when I first, or just before I woke up, and then it's been rising just before I got up, and then it's been fairly steady. I've been out and taught a one-to-one Pilates class this morning, and it hasn't really changed my blood sugar level. So that's a nicely controlled blood sugar level, nice on the level. And let's see what lunch does to the data. So there's my first update. It's going to be quite an interesting journey for me because there's a lot going on here. But within a few days, I'm sure I'm going to get used to using it and interpreting the data. And actually, as I say, experimenting. So I'm going to start buying some foods I wouldn't normally buy, like fruits that are not low glycemic index fruits, see what they do to my curves, buy some honey, have some honey, see what that does to my curve, just so I get an idea of what it does for my metabolism, having the sort of foods that I tell other people to be sparing with. Does it actually bear out? Does the evidence actually bear that out? So it'll be an interesting journey, and we'll see what's in store. So hopefully that made sense, and I will see you probably in a couple of days now. Let me do some more days of data, play with some data, and then I've got some curves to show you with certain foods being consumed. Okay, thank you.